ما شفتها. السلام عليكم، يعطيكم العافية. معاكم محمد دشتي. And is there anyone here who doesn't speak Arabic? أنا قاعد أدور واحد ما يتحكي عربي عشان أضطر أعطيها بالإنجليزي. So yeah, I'll do most of my talk today in English, but you're more than welcome to ask questions in Arabic or English. I may switch back and forth, but just يعني to give you guys the يعني heads up. So yes, so who am I? My name is محمد دشتي. I'm currently a cybersecurity team leader in the banking sector. In a previous world, I was doing my PhD. I completed my PhD in Canada, in the University of British Columbia. And before that, I did my master's also in Canada at Simon Fraser University in computer science. And I have a mobile telecommunications degree. So I've been around the technology fields, I'd say. And I'll use this instead because I like to move on the stage. It makes it more comfortable. So أغلب أبحاثي والresearch was in the areas of memory systems, computing systems, and operating systems. شنو يعني? When you have any specific system, let's say that you have a Linux system. So Linux is an operating system where you can run applications and all of that. And it runs most of the servers and the clouds and all of this. So all these systems, they touch memory one way or another. You load stuff from memory, you modify data, you do all of this in memory. So this is kind of like my main areas of expertise. So, which is directly applicable to cybersecurity. As I will explain, most of the recent attacks, or most of all attacks, are really memory corruption exploits. I'll explain all of this in the coming slide, so stay with me. So this will be the flow of my talk. I will initially talk about bugs, vulnerabilities, and exploits. Then I will move into AI assistants. I will give how are they integrated into programming environments. And then at the end, I will give a quick demo demonstrating the features of these AI assistants. So let's start with bugs, vulnerabilities, and exploits. Can someone spot a bug in this Super Mario game? There is a bug. What is it? Exactly. So if you see the star disappears, but if you concentrate a little bit, it disappears the moment you actually hit the next power-up. So this wasn't designed in. This is a bug that was introduced through not properly coding the game itself. So as you know, video games, applications, websites, these are all programmed using some sort of programming language. So it's not magic. So Super Mario didn't come up to the screen through magic. No, trust me, there was code behind all of this. So is this a vulnerability? هل هذه ثغرة أمنية؟ شوي نحط عربي بالموضوع لازم ضروري. هل هذه ثغرة أمنية؟ يعني most probably not. لأن خطأ بالكود ما يعطي ال output that is expected. So this brings me to the next point. What is the difference between a bug, a vulnerability, and an exploit? So as I mentioned, a bug is an error. A vulnerability is an error that poses security concerns, security problems. An exploit is the actual يعني taking the vulnerability and exploiting it to do something malicious. فأنا قاعد أبني الحين معاكم شوي لأن راح أوصل شنو سبب البجز هذه شلون قاعد راح أربطها مع البروجرامينج والكودينج والاي اي. Don't worry, this is still gonna be covered يعني. So again, bug is not a vulnerability. A vulnerability may not really lead to an exploit. So as I mentioned, where do these bugs and vulnerabilities happen? You see them in applications, in protocols, in operating systems. So for example, I come from a Linux kernel background. So I dig deep into the C programming code of the Linux kernel. So there are hundreds of bugs in the Linux kernel. and people find these bugs out every day. So these are all applications or protocols, or actually even hardware chips. So as I will mention in the coming slide, you will see that even hardware features can be problematic. So maybe we have some hardware guys in the room where they design code using VHDL and all of this, and they burn into ASICs or specific chipsets. Sometimes the designs themselves can introduce bugs and vulnerabilities. Good. So has anyone here heard of the dirty pipe exploit in Linux? No? No one? Good, it's fine. You don't have to know about it. So this specific vulnerability, a couple of years back, it was in the Linux kernel. It led to something called privilege escalation. انتوا الحين لما تدشون على السيستم بعض الكمبيوتر انجينيرنج تدش لوج ان تدخل اليوزر نيم والباسورد دشيت على السيستم SSH او غيره. You logged into the system. You are a normal user. User عادي, you don't have any specific privileges. This specific exploit, which was inside the code of the kernel itself, the kernel is what that takes care of the whole system, the applications, the processes, scheduling, all of this. So this specific bug allowed the privilege escalation. يعني I become root. يعني I become the super user of this specific system by simply executing specific sequences of code. And you see this portion of code that I put here? This is actually the fix for this bug. It was only a single line. line واحد بالكود حل المشكلة كلها. هذا المشكلة يسمونها uninitialized variable. باللينكس kernel في عندكم أكيد ماخذين بعضكم من programming languages. So in programming languages إذا تستخدمون object oriented programming languages مثل C++ وغيرها, you have objects and all of this. In C, it's not object oriented programming, but the closest to object oriented programming is structs. So you create structs that has specific مثلا stuff. So the problem was with one member variable of a struct inside the Linux kernel that led to privilege escalation. So really, I took this code from the commit in GitHub. So these projects are maintained in repositories where people commit codes and fixes. So they only added this initialization line to fix this code. So as I mentioned, bugs can also happen at the hardware level. Some of you here are Nintendo Switch users, maybe, I don't know. But there's a big project called Yuzu. So I don't know if I'm spelling it correctly, but I know it's Yuzu. So it's an emulator. It's a Nintendo Switch emulator that يعني allowed the functionality of this emulator simply by exploiting a bug in the hardware chip of the Nintendo Switch. So models from 2018 and before, they have this Tegra X1 processor. It's from NVIDIA, based on ARM architecture. You don't have to worry about all of this now. But just understand that there was actually a bug. I think it's called fusée. I don't know if this is French or something. So هذا الexploit, you can search it online to know exactly the details. But اللي بوصل لكم إياه إن الثغرات الأمنية مو بس تكون بالكود، ساعات حتى بالهاردوير itself. وطبعاً الحين if you want to follow along, there's a big lawsuit between Nintendo and Yuzu whether or not this is legitimate to actually create this emulator or not. So how do the vulnerabilities occur? It's because of you guys here. Every developer who wrote a single line of code, you guys are the reason for why this is happening to us all. يعني every programmer has their own way of programming. Sometimes when you work for an institution or a company that does development, they have a specific standards of how to do code, blah, 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 all of this. But at the end, no matter how careful you are, you will make mistakes. You will make mistakes. So I'm slowly dragging you into coding and whether AI will actually solve this problem or not, but just stay with me. So, these bugs, how are they detected? Sometimes, okay, you run the code. As I mentioned, there is a bug. You notice, oh, there is a bug here. This is not what's supposed to happen. So I dig deep. So by human interaction, I figure out the bug and I fix it. Sometimes, no. We employ something called fuzzers. So fuzzers, these are mostly for more complex يعني applications and projects. So you actually have automatic systems that try to يعني break this application through different يعني ايش يقولون عنهم بالعربي؟ بدور بالعربي الحين. محنش عن انجليزي الحين بعد بدور بالعربي. So different coding paths, I would say maybe. So you try out different paths of the application itself until you break it. Once you break it, you can go back and see what exactly happens. So these fuzzers, for example, the Linux kernel employs a continuous fuzzer that does all of this. Anyway, but fuzzers do not really mean that you can actually detect vulnerabilities, because it's almost impossible for big projects. It's almost impossible to test out every path in code. Almost impossible. So I know I'm throwing maybe some terminologies that may not be familiar. بعض العناوين قاعد احطها ما قاعد ادش فيها بالتفاصيل متعمد. أبيكم أنتم تدورون. Dish, if you're interested in fuzzers, go search what fuzzers are. If you're interested in Yuzu, go play Nintendo Switch games. So yes, also there are something called static analyzers and sanitizers. These are all tools that allow developers to actually fix their code. Good. So these vulnerabilities, they are not created equal. Some of them are okay, minor. Some of them are really high risk. You know what a 0 day is? A 0 day is a vulnerability that the vendor had 0 days to actually know about. So the vendor, الشركة أو مالت المصمم الابلكيشن ما عنده أي خبر إن الفولنربيلتي هذه موجودة. بس هذه الفولنربيلتي sometimes it gets detected by hackers, maybe through fuzzing, through something else, through internal knowledge. And sometimes I refer to the term -1 days. Maybe you've never heard of this before. Maybe this is exclusive here at this conference. So -1 days is when the vendor themselves intentionally introduce a specific bug so that it can be exploited later on. So this is a -1 day. فيصل سجل هذا أنا قلت أول واحد بالكويت. So actually 2/3 of the 0-day exploits, this was actually by a report from Google a couple of days back. 2/3 of the 0-day exploits detected in the wild are memory corruption vulnerabilities. راح اشرح شنو memory corruption vulnerabilities. If you remember اللي كان حاضر محمد الدوب، مهندس محمد الدوب، ذكر شيء اسمه البفر overflow. البفر overflow is a memory corruption vulnerability. I will talk you guys slowly through this, but stay with me. بس اللي ابيكم تطلعون من النتيجه بهالسلايد هذه ان not all vulnerabilities are created equal. Some of them are riskier than others. So another suggestion by people was to actually use safe programming languages. يعني مثلا C, C++, which actually powers probably maybe, I don't know, maybe 90% of the infrastructure of the world, I don't know, are not safe. يعني شنو not safe؟ يعني they allow you to shoot yourself in the foot. They allow you to manipulate pointers. If you know pointers, where you can actually allocate code on the heap, on the stack, it's not pointers. But sometimes you use pointers to make your life easier in these programming languages. في لغات برمجة جديدة حاولت تحل مشكلة unsafeness of these programs مثل Rust. يعني Rust is a modern programming language that just does not allow you to يعني create a buffer overflow. يعني if you want to use Rust in the normal way, you will never have a buffer overflow. بس اللي راح يصير إنه sometimes you have something called unoptimized code. يعني الكود that is written by Rust is not the most optimal. Or you cannot actually achieve something you want to achieve. فالبروجرامر شو يسوون؟ Rust نفسه بالlanguage features نفسه they have something called unsafe block. هل unsafe block allows you to run unsafe code in Rust. فما حلينا المشكلة. احنا اوكي جبنا ويلا يا جماعة عندك unsafe سوي الoptimization inside the unsafe part of the code. So this is a big problem. Yes, so Rust and also on top of this أنا عندي وقت صح. أنتم ماخرين البداية بعد كيف. في مثال مثلا احنا الحين you have to actually يعني differentiate between prevention and mitigation. فاحنا الحين قاعد نتحكي نبي نغير لغات البرمجه بالعالم. يعني مثلا الحين الوايت هاوس قبل last week maybe they released a statement, oh everyone go away from C and C++, look for more safe programming languages. حتى بالعربي عشان لا يفهموني، ايش رايك بس خطه؟ ما يفيد. انا اقول لك you will not be able to actually يعني just flip the switch and go to safe programming languages. You will live with unsafe programming languages for the foreseeable future. هذا مثل IPv6. تذكرون قبل IPv6 is gonna solve all our problems, everything's gonna have an IP address. أنا كنت باليو كي وقت 2006 كينجز كولج لندن، كنت قاعد مع مدرس ويتحكى وكتاب it's IPv6. Do we use IPv6 today? I don't know. No. So yes. So again, I said prevention and mitigation. Prevention is this. They try to add measures to prevent problems from happening in the first place. Mitigation, لا. You create guardrails. يعني مثلا إذا خط سريع، إذا بتبي تسوي prevention مثلا، أنت تعدل الشوارع كلها وتخلي السيارات كلها تمشي من نفسها و they communicate between يعني completely change the infrastructure of roads. هذا prevention. You prevent accidents from happening in the first place. Mitigation لا، حد سرعة، مخالفات، سجن، ما ادري شنو، يعني you mitigate the problems once they happen and you try to contain them. So again, I went back to buffer overflow because this is what I'm going to be concentrating on, and this is still very relevant today. يعني أنا ودي صدق إن really الطلبة وغير الطلبة they really يعني build on the information and increase their level of understanding of these specific concepts. لأن on the long run ما حد راح يقول يلا XSS cross site scripting vulnerability، يعني راح يكون هذه شغلات بسيطة مقارنة بالشغلات اللي صدق راح تكون يعني لها دور كبير في الهاكينج in the future. So again, what can be done with a buffer overflow? If you write code, this doesn't, and if you introduce a buffer overflow at the end of the demo, I will try to demonstrate a buffer overflow. Maybe I don't know if it's going to be successful or not, so don't count on this, but let's see. So you can, if you're lucky, it's a program crash. يعني الابلكيشن مالك والكراش وخلاص انتهى الموضوع. Sometimes لا. Someone can actually utilize this buffer overflow to get local privilege access. يعني أنا أيبك تذكرون لما قلت لكم تدش على لينكس سيستم أنت كيوزر عادي، ما عندك هاي privileges، ما عندك مثلا تقدر تسوي شغلات معينة. You cannot read the password file, you cannot insert modules in the Linux kernel, you cannot do all of this. So you're still contained. Sometimes no, a buffer overflow مثل ما شفنا بالdirty pipe vulnerability, it can lead to privilege escalation. You become root. And this is the aim of all hackers, I believe. You become root. So, I mean, these vulnerabilities, as I mentioned, some of them high risk, low risk, they're classified. So this CVE, common vulnerabilities and exposures, it's a system that tracks vulnerabilities and places a ranking or a number on how يعني risky this specific vulnerability is. هذا السلايد حاطه كذي عشان بس يعني تدرون في شيء اسمه CVE. Once you go into the, إن شاء الله تخرجون توظفون وهذا، وفي عندنا هم متخرجين وخالصين بعد أتوقع، مو بس طلبة. Good. Okay, so I picked a couple of CVEs. These are recent, kind of like recent CVEs. This is from Apple. So Apple usually do not يعني state exactly what the vulnerability in their يعني مثلا CVEs are. ما تدري. يعني Apple يقول لك احنا كان عندنا vulnerability لها علاقة بالشغلة الفلانية، بس تفاصيل دقيقة Apple ما يعطون. هني تعتمد على الريسيرشرز ساعات يربطون يكتشف ان هذه المشكله كانت كذي بافر اوفرفلو مثلا بالايمج رندرنج سيستم وات ايفر. يعني الريسيرشرز usually they figure things out. Again, I'm just giving you examples of how CVEs are, what it does, what it can do, or when it was added, when it should be fixed before sometimes called a POC is declared. يعني ساعات يكون في vulnerability يكون something called under an embargo. يعني ما يصير أي واحد مكتشف الفولنربيلتي يسوي proof of concept exploit. يعني ما أقدر أنا أكتب exploit that actually takes يعني this vulnerability and makes it يعني actionable. You have to wait for a specific date. الشركة خلال الوقت هذا لازم pushes a patch. إذا الشركة did not push a patch by this day, or if it pushed a patch, خلاص الembargo is lifted and everyone can actually يعني release their exploits. عشان كذي ساعات يكون عندك proof of concepts exploits. ساعات if you search online on GitHub you will see specific exploits for any vulnerability. والمشكلة ان احنا هذه نواجهها وايد ان systems not patched continuously. even these end days vulnerabilities that have يعني POCs of exploits يعني people can still exploit them. So we have to be extremely careful. Good. Again, I'm slowly moving towards coding. These vulnerabilities, we have some specific bodies, international bodies. They create these common weaknesses enumeration. So they classify these kinds of vulnerabilities. يعني يقول لك إن مثلاً top 10 key exploited vulnerabilities. If you see, I don't know if it's visible, maybe it's not very visible. I have maybe in the next slide. Yeah. So the top 3 are memory corruption vulnerabilities. The top 3. So just to give you an understanding. So 46% of the top 10 key exploited vulnerabilities are memory related to memory safety. عشان كذي لما يجون White House ولا غيرهم يقولون move away from, yeah, it's understandable. Of course it's understandable, but it's not going to happen يعني in an overnight. Good. So now we understood vulnerabilities, bugs, how they get introduced, all of this, who introduces them. We know all of this. So now, with the introduction of AI, okay, now we understand the regular way of writing code. But with the introduction of AI, will programming in the first place go away? Not necessarily, because you see, this is he's a very famous guy. This guy, if you don't know John Carmack, he actually, if you play any video games, you should very well know John Carmack. So he created Doom. Exactly. I like the gamers in the house here. So he's considered هو واحد من أفضل المبرمجين بالعالم. And he's still a programmer. يعني ليه يومك هذا ما قال لا خلاص أنا مانجمنت الحين وانتهى الموضوع ما حط إيدي شو اسمه لا. Still hands on programmer. yeah, he said يعني coding in the concept of writing code in C or Java or whatever was never the end goal يعني. It's about problem solving. يعني whether you solve this problem writing C code with pointers and all of this, or whether you solve it by instructing the AI to do something. This is problem solving. So this يعني ability will not be created from AI. This is my belief. يعني إحنا we still have to possess problem solving يعني skills to remain relevant. Those who will rely on خلاص AI حل لي المشكله الفلانيه من غير ما فكر لي انا بالماشين. اوكي في شغلات بسيطه مثلا انت متهاوش مع مديرك تبي يكتب لك ايميل write this email with an angry voice to talk to my مثلا عادي. This is fine. ما لك خلق تكتب مثلا. But sometimes no you need really يعني problem solving يعني you really need to think deep about all of يعني the concepts of what you're trying to do. So what are AI assistants? So with show of hands. I always hated show of hands, but I will do it now. So with show of hands, how many have used or heard about AI assistants? Good. So you most probably heard about maybe GitHub Copilot, right? This is maybe the most widely known. But as I will show, there are many. And even in the demo, I will do something else. I will not use Copilot. So they assist you. Essentially, as مثل ما بالسيشنز اللي قبل هذه تحكينا عن ال LLMs وهذه. This is what AI assistants are. Essentially LLMs predict the next word, predict the next block of code. The same. Large language models, this is what they do. Based on tremendous training on huge amounts of data, figure out what to say next. So if you're writing a sentence or an essay, they will simply figure out what's the next best word in this specific concept. This is what LLMs are. Essentially, there's what they are. They get trained on millions of data. How they use this data, whether this data is cleaned up or not, again this is things that are online. مثلا أعطيكم مثال. الحين AI assistant is trained based on millions of GitHub repositories. الحين هذيل الGitHub repositories many of them contains bugs, يعني buggy code. فأنت حتى الcoding assistant possibly they will actually suggest code that is buggy. في مشاكل. still يعني يعتمد اعتماد really it really heavily relies on what data you feed this specific LLM. Anyway, as I mentioned, GitHub Copilot, but there is something called Codium AI. There is something called Cody. AWS Code Whisperer, Tab 9, Codium, which I will be using today. I will be using Codium, not Codium AI. Codium. It's different, actually, two different companies. Codium AI is more targeted toward testing-oriented AI. Codium, it's really the equivalent of GitHub Copilot, but it's free. ليش تدفع $10 بالشهر؟ Take it for free. ما قاعد أسوي دعاية. I'm not يعني sponsored by Codium, but they're free. It's an open source product that you can actually apply. يعني I'm not saying that it's the best. Maybe it's not the best, but it's a free alternative to GitHub Copilot that allows you to have this AI assistant next to you. Oops, sorry. So the question really is that we're trying to answer today. Do AI assistants really help produce more secure code? Actually, there were studies on this. And the short answer is no. They don't. Because sometimes AI assistants gives you the illusion that you're writing secure code. So, يلا, read from a file. Output the specific in a specific format. But it was shown in this study that those programmers who used AI assistants are more likely to think that their code is secure, whereas their code is not secure. And also the study showed that those who didn't will more يعني scrutinize their code to actually find bugs. Yeah, so these are some of the research papers that actually assess the specific aspect of AI coding. So as I mentioned, can I trust AI code? No. You still have to really review your code. Sometimes AI tools will assist you in assisting your code, but at the end of the day, especially I'm talking, I mean, if you've noticed the يعني style مال talk, and I'm really considering at the most extreme vulnerabilities. قاعد أحكي عن الشغلات اللي حتى سألت عن المهندس محمد قلت له هل تتوقع أن بالمستقبل راح يصير الوضع ان الزيرو دايز الكل من يسويه؟ انا اتوقع راح يصير كذي، يعني ما راح يصير NSO group or specific يعني regimes and governments will actually create these exploits. It will be in the hands of almost everyone. So in this case ما يحتاج انا اسوي cross site scripting وتعالوا، لا انا عندي zero day zero click. Sometimes there's something called zero day zero click. Zero click شنو يعني؟ If you read about the Pegasus attack, or even the Operation Triangulation, هذيلا they're really advanced exploits. مجرد ما أنا مثلاً Pegasus كان مجرد ما أنا أدق عليك واتساب، إذا دقيت عليك أنا مكالمة واتساب I took full control over your phone. There was a vulnerability in WhatsApp وبالiOS. فريلي advanced exploits قاعد تحكي. فأنا الحين إذا أقدر أسوي كذي، ليش تعال ودش لي على موقع وهاك اللينك وما ادري شو نسوي وفيشنج وش اسمه وحمله ما ادري شنو ودعايات، لا I bypass all of this through a zero click. and I'm talking about the future. This is the future. So yes, this was a sharp end. I didn't expect it. This is the end. Okay, before the demo. So any questions before I move on to the demo? How are we doing on time? Good. Questions?
كان في نقاش على الفولنربيلتيز او آخر شيء تفضلت فيه دكتور محمد، الزيرو دايز أو الزيرو كليكس. وجهة نظري توجه الحين على الهاردوير، هاردوير بيست زيرو كليكس، بيس باندز، المودمز، النيو تشيبس اللي قاعد تطلع وتنحط مثلا بالموبايل ديفايسز، الفيديو تشيبس، الجي بي يوز. للحين ما اخذت حقها من ناحيه الاسسمنت، من ناحيه خلينا نقول بروبر فاليديشن. يعني اخر مثال شفته اللي هو الانتل برانش بريدكشن اللي طلع لنا الفولنربيلتيز بالسي بي يوز نفسه. اتوقع نفس التوجه احنا قاعد نعيده مره ثانيه على النيو هاردوير. فشلون نربط هالشيء مع الاي اي؟ يعني اليوم الاتاك فيكتور نفسه واضح، لكن يمكن الاي اي موديل ما عنده كابابيلتي انه يفهم الهاردوير ديزاين اوف ذا تشيب اتسلف، لكن سهل انك يوبتينت، واذا ما كان بروبرايتري يعني طبعا، وفيد تو ذا موديل ويطلع لك مثلا فازنج تيستنج كيس ويطلع لك اياها. لكن هل احنا هذا اكبر كونسيرن، ولا راح يكون ان نيو اتاك فيكتور له علاقه بالميموري كوربشن؟
هو good question. So definitely the hardware has been and still is one of the يعني I'd say يعني dangerous attack vectors. يعني مثلا هذا operation triangulation they utilize 4 zero days. One of them actually is in a hardware instruction that was not declared by Apple. يعني حتى Apple عشان اقول لكم شنو minus 1 days قلت لكم ابل نفسه ما اعلنوا عن الانستركشن هذه نفسها بالهاردوير. But someone actually found a vulnerability in the execution of this specific instruction to build their chain for this specific attack. وmemory corruption will always stay. أنا أقول لك. What AI can do, I'm not an expert in hardware and how to secure hardware, but I would say formal verification. So if you have these technical documents describing the specific hardware, probably the AI will assist in making sure that the design is formally verified. So formal verification is making sure that there are actually absolutely no mistakes that can happen. So I would say this might be one يعني domain where AI can assist in يعني taking care of this problem. Any more questions?
مرحبا. قبل كان في الهبه صارت مالت المواقع اللي مثل ويكس تسوي لك مواقع جاهزه تمبلتس، والحين طبعا في الناس اللي قاعد يستخدمون الاي اي عشان يسوون لهم مواقع بعد نفس الشيء. هل الحاجتين هذول راح يزيدون من موجود الفولنربيلتيز والزيرو دايز؟
Vulnerabilities possibly. 0 days I don't think so. Because yeah, definitely I agree with you. الحين حتى اللي ما يعني عمره ما كتب كود حق موقع يقدر easily to create their own code, whether Wix or even ال chat GPT وغيرهم. مثلا go to chat GPT, design a simple website that does blah 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 blah. You can get at least the template that you can start on. Will it create vulnerabilities? Possibly, because if we إذا احنا قلنا ان هذيل ال AIs وقاعد نقول بيس على دراسات ما قاعد تخلي الكود اللي يطلع secure 100%. Possibly yeah, for someone who just takes this code and applies it for their own website or the application, yeah, definitely. لأن هو مو عارف, he didn't design the code himself, or he didn't go through round of reviews, or test. في concept اسمه test driven development, DevSecOps. terminologies صارت شوية يعني مستهلكة. But sometimes they really يعني help going through your code multiple times, having different teams, having automated systems that run specific tests. يعني أنت you design test cases for your application that it has to pass before going to production. إذا أنت ما عندك specific test that guarantee that there are no issues happening وتأخذ الكود مثل ما قلت الموقع كذا جاهز ولا I design through AI, yeah, definitely it may, I would say, introduce vulnerability. Absolutely. Good. Yes, we'll go quickly for the demo maybe. Good. خلاص. I will use. I will be on my PC here. سوبر ماريو ترى وصل، ابشركم. نسيته. اي ما نسيت انا، وصل. ابالكم معلق مني؟ لا وصل. Okay, so before I go to the so this is the AI assistant that I said that I was going to use. You can go to this website, or if you prefer, there is a plug-in in VS Code. So I assume that everyone here almost uses VS Code. I use Vim. I'm a Vim user, but I encourage everyone to use VS Code and learn Vim. For those who know what I'm talking about, I actually moved away from Emacs to Vim, and this was the best decision I made. But so VS Code, you can actually integrate it. You can actually integrate VS Code. You can actually integrate Codium into VS Code or Vim or Sublime or whatever. So, for example, let's do. So, have you heard about the concept of the demo gods? This is where they jump in and make trouble for you. Yeah. Whenever you want to do a demo, ساعات تصير في مشاكل. So let's say test.py. Maybe line شوية صغير ما يبين، صح؟ اوكي. انا ما راح استخدم فيم، بس الحين بوريكم ان راح استخدم بعد شوي في اس كود. بس الحين for a quick test to see you and it's compatible with all of this and how it really works. So for example, let's say ترى this is live improvise، مو not prepared to be honest. So let's say I want to compare sorting algorithms. اوكي حلو. الحين مو انا قاعد اكتب الكود كمان. الحين it's generating an array. انا الديمو الرئيسي مالي راح اسويه بالسي، بس الحين قلت اجرب. اوكي it created an insertion sort for me. الحين الطلبه اللي هني عندهم homework assignments مكيفين اتوقع، ما يحتاج يتفكر الحين خلاص. bubble sort حلو. let's say now okay quick sort. let's say I want to compare the performance of sorting algorithms. hello come on. okay we generated arrays start time and time. hello anyway انا مو هذا الرئيسي مالي، بس هذا ببين لكم ان using AI assistance you can quickly generate code. you can quickly jump at what you want to do. الحين لو مثلا خلاص I want to، ما ادري اذا راح يصير ولا ما راح يصير. I think it worked but there is 1,000 arrays so it's okay. هذا اول واحد فيه ما كنا نقدر of course you can actually place description. So what's happening here, it's comparing the running time for different sorting algorithms in Python. okay أسرع واحد insertion sort is it? I don't know maybe. anyway so this is a quick demo of using Codium inside them. now let's أنا الحين هذا كود كاتبه to be honest so maybe due to timing constraint أنا قلت بها أكتبها جاهزة ونفس الوقت أحط لي واحد شو اسمه فI will لحظة تشوف. okay so now I'm running VS Code and I want the experts here to find the heap buffer overflow. يلا أبي الإكسبرتس الحين اللي heap buffer overflow. so what's happening here? I really tested this. so So actually there is a heap buffer. طبعا شنو heap buffer overflow? We talked about buffer overflows. You sometimes write beyond the boundaries of your arrays. So what's happening here? What's happening here? أنا أقول لكم vim user مو. Okay. So what's happening? The buffer size. Okay. I created an array. So on this line 13, I allocated an array on the heap with max buffer size times 4. And what I want to do, I want to take user input up to 32 characters and encode them into something else. So every character, A can be encoded to A, B can be encoded to B, whatever. And then I will store this into this buffer. So what's happening here is on this line, on line 22, I'm allocating the user buffer, where I will take the user input and encode them. And I intentionally have the output buffer 4 times the user input buffer, because this is by design. I want to design so that every character will be encoded into 4 more characters. However, when I do my encoding, so I take the user input, I remove the, forget about all of this, just concentrate here. So what's happening here is that if the character is an ampersand, or it can be an A or B or whatever, I'm giving just an example here, it will be encoded into 5 more characters. So what's going to happen here, if you have your buffers, if you have the input contains many of these ampersands, you will actually overwrite the output buffer, causing a heap buffer overflow. طبعا how this heap buffer overflow can be exploited, it's more difficult than stack-based buffer overflows. Because on stack-based buffer overflows, and I'm going to just throw terminologies here, just bear with me. You can use something called ROP, retain-oriented programming, or jump-oriented programming, to actually pick gadgets in your code and jump from one to another to execute whatever you want to execute. And sometimes you have to actually bypass some mitigation. So you say, okay, didn't مثلا operating system solve this problem, create no execute or whatever? Yes, there are mitigations in place. No execute, control flow integrity, and all of this. But again, hackers found a way to actually move around with these gadgets. Heap buffer overflows are a bit more complex because you have to overflow something called a function pointer sometimes and then move around. Also, you can do it with RAP as well. But again, what I'm saying is this is not easy. I mean, this is an easy portion of code, but you can imagine in large code bases, these issues will be introduced. You will see them regardless. And AI will not solve this problem because, again, based on training, it saw a lot of bugs. So it will not make the perfect decision. I believe that, again, I'm talking about the really niche level of exploits and vulnerabilities. I'm not talking about higher levels that can be detected. I'm talking about the niche ones. You still, up until this day, I believe, and maybe in the future as well, you definitely need analysts and experts who really truly understand the interworkings of operating systems, networking, all of this to make the perfect decision. AI is not the solution when it comes to cybersecurity, I believe, these days. And I think that's it. We'll have some time for the next session. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I'm done.